Salsify is one of those forgotten vegetables you will never find in the grocery store. It has been called the oyster plant, though some dispute any semblance. I happen to love growing unusual crops just for the fun. In past years, I have grown common salsify known as tragopogon and enjoyed its taste. But it turns out there's another species called Black Salsify, known as Scorzonera. I had to try it. I'll show you how I grew this odd plant, and I'll share a delicious chowder dish I cooked up with the results. You might want to try it too. I am excited to try this plant. I liked the other Salsify, although I felt that the roots were kind of small, and it did take a long while for the plant to develop. Now, I want to see how this one works. The best time to sow Salsify is in early spring, as soon as temperatures start warming up. Black Salsify is a perennial that needs plenty of sunlight to produce large roots. The garden bed I had available did get a bit of morning shade, but I was hoping that the 5 hours of direct sun would be enough. Much like any root crops, I think it's always best to direct sow it. I learned this the hard way years ago when I tried growing Salsify first in cups to then transplant it to the ground. This was not only unnecessary since the seeds sprout readily, it also caused the roots to grow kinked and misshapen. Most root crops like carrots and parsnips are the taproot of the plant. It is the first root to grow when the seeds germinate. If it hits any object like the bottom of a pot or a rock, it kinks and grows misshapen. While my soil was generally loose and friable, it still contained enough rocks and pebbles to cause trouble, as I would later find out. I simply dropped the seeds into shallow furrows about 8 inches apart. I tend to grow things too close together, so I advise you to space the rows 12 inches apart. The best way to ensure straight, even roots is to grow them in potting soil, or if you're using your native soil, you should sieve it through a mesh to remove rocks and pebbles. You can also add compost to enrich the soil and lighten the texture. Just like carrots, they especially like loose, sandy soil. A few days later, as the Salsify seeds were starting to germinate, I decided to interplant leek seedlings that were sprouting in a pot. As I said, I tend to jumble plants together to experiment potential companion planting combinations, so I carefully positioned leek seedlings in between the rows of Salsify about 8 inches apart. It is through these experiments that I stumble into new ways of maximizing garden space. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. A week later, an ominous sign from across the garden made me worry about my new seedlings. Terrible thing happened here. All the beans have been eaten. The tops, or most of them, only a few, have their true leaves still standing. That's part of the reason why I made my protected beds, but I can't have my whole garden be like that. I wasn't sure if the culprit was a rabbit or a groundhog, but I had to take action to protect what was sprouting. I had also planted carrots on the other side of the same bed as Salsify, so I improvised a quick chicken wire cloche to protect them. I felt they would be more enticed to eat them instead of the Salsify for some reason. As luck would have it, weeks passed by without an incident. The Salsify seedlings looked picture perfect among the leeks. We're in the beginning of June, and the Black Salsify is showing signs of strength. I hope that they develop well, and they do appear not to compete too much with the leeks, so they might be a good companion plant. We'll see. With a steady schedule of rain, ample grass clippings as mulch, and no sign of famished herbivores, the garden and the Salsify grew in exuberance without too much maintenance. Well, I just neglected it. They take about 120 days to reach harvest size. Ideally, I would have thinned the plants out to be 6 inches apart. But I must confess, thinning is not my favorite garden chore, so I skipped it to see how well they would develop. For science. Turns out, I wasn't the only one interested in seeing how the plants developed. Drier days caused an old garden foe to be attracted to the verdant plants. Who knew that groundhogs actually prefer Salsify greens over carrots? Black Salsify had been looking good, but then suddenly I see some bite marks. I think I'm just going to cut my losses and see how well they're developing. I'll try first to yank it out since the soil seems to be very moist at this point. I quickly learned a few things about Black Salsify. First, you will need a spade or fork to lift them off the ground without snapping. I also should have thinned them because the roots, although not terribly skinny, were not the ideal thickness either. The plants had been competing with each other. I should have also removed all pebbles and rocks from the soil since several of the roots had kinked and forked in response to obstacles. A square shard of ceramic had caused the root to bend at 90-degree angles. This was irrefutable proof that sifting the ground would have been wise. I generally prefer to follow a low-till regimen in my garden, but preparing the soil is essential for Salsify. Despite the groundhog attack, I allowed the roots to stay in place for a month and a half later to see if they would increase in size. Who knew? The heat of summer was subsiding, and the garden was at its peak of growth, punctuated by garish zinnias. By this time, the hungry groundhog had raised all the green growth it deemed fit for consumption, in preparation for the coming winter. You know, I couldn't blame it. I would gladly plant a patch of its favorite foliar fare if it were polite enough to respect my choice plants. But alas, armed with a disheveled fork of tines twisted by underground rocks, I went about collecting what was left of the once exuberant salsifys. This bed was a shadow of its former self. Spindly leeks were the only thing left over, unpalatable to the rodent's distinguished taste. The companion planting experiment had not been very successful. I had crammed too many plants in one spot. Next year, I would take note to space things out properly. Ever since the groundhog found this patch of Salsify, it has just destroyed the leaves. It loves to eat them, and if I want to grow it next year, I'll probably have to grow it inside of a protected cage or something else. I am about to discover if there are any roots left that are usable, because I want to make a dish from the northeast of Brazil, Bahia specifically. It's called Bobó, but I'll do it with a twist. Instead of using shrimp, I'll use this, which is also called the oyster plant by some. Salsify, especially when fried in some olive oil, develops a delicious savory taste unlike any other vegetable. Some liken it to artichoke hearts, but I feel like they're more flavorful. With the soil a bit drier than normal, it took a bit of persuasion to pry off the roots. I can't say they were the most perfect specimens, but there were enough of them to cook up something delicious. They did seem tender, and to be honest, they had been a maintenance-free crop until now. So, if I put a bit more effort next year, I could get even better results. With the roots in hand, I needed to collect a few other garden ingredients to make this delicious Brazilian chowder called Bobó. This dish is traditional in Salvador, a historic coastal town that served as Brazil's colonial capital. I had lived there for 2 years as a child and had fond memories of the tastes and scents of the place. A lot of people mistakenly associate Brazilian cooking with spiciness, perhaps due to the fact that Mexican cooking and other Hispanic cuisines do use a lot of chilies. But Brazilians usually only use the sweet bell peppers, which is what this pepper is. However, the northeast of Brazil is the exception. That's where you can use a little bit of spicy peppers. And I'm going to use what I have growing here, which is a poblano. It's not the spiciest of peppers, but for my taste, it's perfect. Because my day-to-day food tends to be mild, the poblano pepper, measuring around 1,000 to 2,000 Scoville units, has enough pleasant heat, but it's not as hot as jalapenos at 3,500 to 8,000, or cayenne at 30,000 to 50,000 units. Washing and peeling the salsify is the most tedious part of this recipe. In the Netherlands, salsify has been known as kitchen-made sorrow, and it's easy to understand why. There's another very important ingredient to the bobó, and that is a root that really is a staple down in South America. It's a native plant, and it's yucca, or also called manioc. This is the type that you can eat. Some of them have higher levels of toxicity that need to go through a process, but you're not going to find them in your local grocers. This is a fresh variety. It's coated with a food-grade paraffin to preserve the freshness of the root. You can also buy it frozen. It might be easier because you don't have to peel it. You can usually find it in international markets since it's widely used in Latin America and Africa. I was adapting the traditional bobó recipe, or Brazilian shrimp chowder, by using salsify instead of shrimp. Salsify is not used in Brazil. Oddly enough, it's a traditional ingredient in Portugal called Scorzonera that has fallen out of use in modern times. There is a traditional recipe though for sweet crystallized salsify in the Évora region of Portugal. If you get a fresh yucca root like I have here, you will need to peel it before cooking. By scoring the root in a spiral, you can easily pry off the outer skin. Yucca serves as the starch base for the chowder, giving it body and heartiness. Once peeled, I cut the root into chunks and dropped it into a pressure cooker with a bit of water. You can use a regular pan if you don't have a pressure cooker. This is just a traditional element in every Brazilian home, and it saves not only time but energy. Boiling the roots in a regular pan will just take longer. I added a bit of olive oil, closed the lid, and let the pan gain pressure. Peeling salsify is another annoying step. Its milky sap can stain hands as it quickly oxidizes, so use a knife or spoon to scrape the roots to reveal the white flesh underneath. You can do this under a trickle of running water to avoid the sap. Drop them in water with lemon juice or vinegar to stop oxidation. Once the pan with yucca gained pressure, I lowered the heat and allowed it to cook for 15 to 20 minutes, or until the roots were very tender. Meanwhile, I chopped the additional ingredients that would impart flavor to the chowder, including an heirloom tomato picked fresh from the garden, the sweet bell pepper, and the poblano pepper. If you want to further remove the spiciness of the poblano, you can discard the seeds and cut out the white rib from the inside of the pepper. This is where most of the capsaicin, the oil responsible for spiciness, resides. I felt that half of a poblano was enough for my taste. To season the dish, I peeled and diced half of an onion. I also peeled, crushed, and finely chopped a few cloves of garlic. This combination is a very common starting point for many Brazilian dishes. Ginger is also often used in spicier dishes from Bahia, so I finely chopped about a tablespoon of fresh ginger. Cilantro would give the herbal base to the recipe. It is essential for the authentic Bahian flavor. If you happen to hate cilantro, as some people unfortunately do, you may want to skip it and use parsley instead. Just know it will not have the same effect. Since I am adapting the recipe and replacing one of the main flavor ingredients, which is dried shrimp, I'm going to be using a 4-pronged approach to developing the umami flavor that reminds us of seafood. The first thing is to use, obviously, the salsify, which is called oyster plant. The other thing is to use fresh mushrooms. I'm going to be using a maitake mushroom, but you can also use a lion's mane mushroom. Those are very flavorful mushrooms that hold their weight in this recipe. I finely sliced them and cut the salsify into chunks. The third prong for seafood umami flavor is to use a bona fide coastal ingredient, seaweed. Using a molcajete, I crushed some dried nori sheets into flakes. You can use as much as you like. The pulo do gato, or chef's secret, for the authentic Bahian flavor is to use some unrefined palm oil to stir fry the ingredients. It is a controversial ingredient, and it is not the healthiest option, but it is essential for the authentic scent and taste of the dish. I use about a teaspoon, diluting it with some olive oil. This unrefined palm oil is different from the palm kernel oil used in industrialized foods. It's made from the palm oil fruit and it's traditional in African cuisines. Some palm oil plantations in Southeast Asia have displaced native species like the orangutans by cutting down rainforest. African unrefined palm oil is a different story though. The tree itself is one of the most sustainable sources of edible oil compared to field crop oils. So I treat this as a spice and don't use too much. However, because it's not that healthy, you can skip it if you want. First, I stir-fried the onion, garlic, and ginger until golden. Then came a good pinch of cumin, turmeric, and paprika, and a bit of ground black pepper. This mix is known as the tempero baiano. And then dropped the seaweed flakes. Before the seasoning could burn, I added the remaining wetter ingredients, sauteing everything. The fourth prong for umami flavor is about a tablespoon or so of dried shiitake mushroom powder. I usually buy dried shiitakes from a Korean market, and I pulverize them in a high-speed blender. This adds tons of savory flavor to a dish. Finally, I added salt to taste. It's rather incredible how much the sense of smell brings back memories. This smell of óleo de dendê, or palm oil, brings me back directly to when I was 6-7 years old in Salvador, in Bahia. It's a flood of memories. It's amazing. That's the power scent and taste has on memory. We associate feelings to food. Trying new food can be like opening a door to a new world of possibilities. After relieving the pressure from the pressure cooker, I checked to see that my yucca was cooked enough to be creamed. Using a potato ricer, I mashed the yucca directly onto the pan. The good thing about this tool is that it retains the internal filament at the center of the root, which is tough and fibery. Alternatively, you can mash it with a fork. I added some of the cooking water to create a soupy consistency. About half a can of coconut milk would add the telltale creaminess of Bobó. Coconut milk is actually the traditional ingredient. This is not a substitution. It is essential for the flavor of this chowder. Finally, I adjusted the salt and was ready to plate and enjoy. Because I like soups and chowders that are denser, I tend to make them closer to the consistency of a stew, but you can adjust the consistency by adding more coconut milk, water, or vegetable stock. With several of the ingredients picked fresh from the garden, I was looking forward to tasting this dish. It is always an adventure using new ingredients from the world over. Food can be an entryway into new cultures and experiences. I had a feeling that Black Salsify would become a more present part of my garden in the future.
This is absolutely delicious. Brings a lot of memories with the flavors and scents. Very well balanced and creamy. While you could do this with potatoes, I suppose, it's not going to be as good as if you do it with yuca. And the seaweed gives just a hint of the sea flavor without making it boggy.
This recipe sure was a keeper. I discovered that Black Salsify is indeed very similar in flavor to the common Salsify I had grown previously. There was, however, a great advantage Black Salsify holds over its cousin. I left a few roots in the ground to see how they would develop, and it turns out that in its second year, Black Salsify puts out beautiful, tall, daisy-like yellow flowers that are a welcome addition to a cottage garden. And by the fall, after setting seed, the roots are not only bigger, but generally still tender enough to eat. Common Salsify is biennial and gets tough and woody and then dies in its second year after setting seed, but this Black Salsify was still useful despite my utter neglect. I stir-fried the second year roots in olive oil with salt and pepper, and it was still tender and had the most delicious savory taste a vegetable can have, so this variety sure was a keeper. If you like this video, you may want to check out my previous 3 videos on the history of lettuce, beets, and cucumber. You can also help me produce more in-depth content like this by purchasing art in my Etsy shop or by contributing through my Patreon. If you're new here, remember to subscribe so you know when a new video is out. See you next time.